Well, we're going to start with some training while we wait for our 2 missing members.
Do you guys remember? Ooh, it's. Do you guys remember where you left us? Variances? Yes, the test.
I don't think we got anything
It
specific.
doesn't look familiar at all.
Yeah, we were still in
I don't
like,
think I've ever seen it.
how a bill becomes a law kind of thing.
Yeah,
Oh, is this training? Is this training?
Yeah.
it's a quiz.
We're definitely not on number 17.
You're in tonight, or you're just chilling?
Didn't you know?
I should start from the beginning. Let's start over, Carol.
Yeah, that's right there.
Oh man, you know, it was like an hour into the thing.
Well, you can go quick.
Were
When
you
did we
here?
do this?
Was I here?
Yeah.
Do you remember any of this? I don't remember any.
When did we do this,
I
Carol?
had more fun.
Or Wayne was Wayne did it, because Wayne was talking about when
Yeah.
zoning started.
February
Oh, no wonder I don't
months
remember.
ago.
Like
These-
1920.
Aren't these from
You didn't
us?
see this
Oh,
picture?
that's when I was in Florida.
Well, you know, I'm thinking that
And then-
maybe we
but
could
then he
get
started
the
marching through
projector to work,
different
so we just
items and is that
mumble
from
instead. Is that possible?
No,
Is that
I
your
think you guys are grasping it.
Oh, this looks familiar.
Wait, this is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he did
Did
that.
Okay,
Yeah,
keep going.
No, don't go too fast, I want
No,
to
we
read
did
it.
all that.
yeah. This is all.
Okay, yeah.
Postcard and all that.
Hey, wait a minute. That's
Wait, go back, you went too fast.
That's about it.
No. Okay, so you guys did this?
Yeah,
Long-range planning?
yeah.
Wait.
Because Mass was the first to make planning mandatory when we talked about that.
Okay.
Comp plan?
This is probably where I don't remember this.
We might have skipped over it because you guys already just did a comp plan. I don't know. No?
What's this?
Yeah, we did this.
We did
Are
that.
there other types of
Yeah.
plans? Purpose of
Yeah.
zoning?
Wait, go slow, I want to read it.
So the purpose of zoning is really to protect health, safety, and general welfare. And it's an implementation tool for planning.
And there's nothing in there about design, it's just about health and welfare.
What, design
No.
isn't related to health and welfare?
No.
I don't see anything in there about design.
What I looked at.
Well, that's because that's the original intent of zoning. But the courts have upheld that design and aesthetics can be considered part of that broader health,
Oh, okay.
safety, and welfare of the public. But originally, the concept was created, and it's been since, you know, as time has gone on and lawsuits have been filed and so forth, that has been interpreted.
So some of this was to give a historical perspective of it.
Right.
There he is.
For zoning districts,
Man of the hour. No kidding.
there's a uniformity rule where parcels within a district all have to be treated equally. You can set up different criteria to treat different uses within in a district, but you can't treat one parcel differently from another if it's in the district, in the same district.
Keith, you're not gonna be able to lead planning board unless you could pass a quiz on this stuff.
And you also have to create a map showing where your districts are and what the rules are in those districts. There are also such things as overlay districts that are additional rules that apply to the mapped underlying district. You guys went through this? Do you want to go through this?
Did I go? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's explain.
So there are different ways that you can allow uses, either straight by right, so you identify the uses that you can just go and undertake, or you can require special permits, which you guys reviewed. Findings are a type of special permit, but in Northampton, the zoning board deals with those, as opposed to planning board. But it's basically a function of any special permit granting authority. Variances are only allowed, or basically a waiver of the standard zoning in that district. And then site plan approval is just, you all know, is just a way to look at how the site is used on the property. It's not about use, but about how it functions on the property. And then comprehensive permits are essentially, again, waivers, and these are Massachusetts unique, and not every state has comprehensive permits. Comprehensive permit is about developing affordable housing, and it's about one-stop shopping for permits. It's not, and so basically an applicant just comes to the zoning board, the way it's designated here as the zoning board, is the board charged with granting all relevant permits in the city, so that you don't have to go to different boards to get your permit.
Have we ever?
Did we do that?
No, zoning board is granted that authority.
I mean, do they do
Under
it?
state
Have they done
statute.
it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You guys, the way we set it up in Northampton is that the planning board provides an advisory role to the zoning board, but the planning board has no jurisdiction over a comprehensive permit application.
So it has to be 100% affordable housing?
No, it's 25%.
So we've only, the ones that we've done were like on that Verona Street,
Yep.
and then maybe,
Habitat
A
66.
lot of the
Yeah.
habitat ones you've seen recently, there was one on Ryan Road, there was Route 66,
I'm sorry,
there's one, the SRO out on Earl Street.
I thought you said if it's a comprehensive plan, it doesn't come to us, but Habitat did come to us.
No, the planning board provides advisory recommendations to the zoning board. Since the zoning board doesn't look at site plans, they don't necessarily know what to look for. So we always have applicants come to the planning board first, and the planning board gives recommendations to the zoning board. Yes, this, you might want to incorporate condition X, Y, and Z to meet thus and such standards. But the idea of the comprehensive permit is that many zoning, in other communities across Massachusetts, the zoning sometimes can be too onerous and costly for applicants to build affordable housing. So this is a way to sort of cut through the cost of meeting some of those requirements. So since the zoning board is the one who grants variances, this is in effect a variance, and the zoning board has the authority to waive any zoning ordinance requirements through that process.
This is the thing, it's linked to the 11% or 10%
Right.
affordable housing.
Right, and so the way it's linked to that, if you don't meet there's a state standard for providing affordable housing, that every community, the goal is to have 10% affordable housing, units of affordable housing. And if you have less than 10%, then applicants can come forward and basically get waivers from zoning, get affordable housing, big projects done, and if there's an appeal, it goes to the housing board, basically based out of Boston, and most likely would be upheld by this other state entity. So you basically lose your local authority, but if you're above your 10% threshold, which Northampton is, then it doesn't, your appeal, you don't have the same appeal rights to go and get the state to come in and basically say, no, you're not meeting your required 10%, so therefore we're going to supersede this decision and mandate essentially that this housing gets in. It happens more frequently in the eastern part of the state, and you get these big developments coming, 40-unit developments in Concord or Maynard or wherever, and people are up in arms because you get these big, 10-story high-rise buildings or something with affordable housing, which is completely out of character from the suburban, genteel character. All right. Anyway, so that's comprehensive permit. Okay, so we have as defined in Chapter 48, we have the special permit granting authority, which is both, in some cases, the planning board, and other cases, the zoning board in Northampton. And then there's site plan review. Variances, again, I already sort of went through this. This is sort of duplicative of the previous slide. This is set up in state statute. Planning board is comprised of 5 to 9 members. You can can have associate members, and you have staggered terms. This is the breakdown for the ZBA, 3 to 5 members, they also have associate members. Your role as a planning board is to conduct comprehensive planning studies, make zoning amendment public hearings, and recommendations on those zoning changes, and you're the special permit granting authority. For most all the special permits required in the zoning ordinance. Again, zoning board has some of that, they deal with signs and fences and a couple other things. But they don't do site plan review, and you guys write the subdivision rules and approve them and do subdivision review. Zoning board role. They're also special permit granting authority, and they got findings and variances, which are the other permits. So special permits generally are, you have to find that the uses are in harmony with the zoning, and you can impose, you're allowed by statute to impose conditions. And you also need to identify in your ordinance what the standards are for approving or denying a special permit. And they have to be, those reasons for denial have to be related to the zoning, the standards outlined in the zoning ordinance. These are the things that are specifically called out as requiring special permits: increases in density, multifamily in non-residential zoned areas, cluster and open space developments require special permits, or adult entertainment, and all the other little items that we've decided on a local level should require special permits. You all are required to make a positive finding and assign in terms of each condition and how it relates to the project and complying with the zoning.
Just one second for that one.
Yeah.
It says, we'll be doing cutbacks in our budget. And so beginning to think about what are the things that we're actually going to be doing and what can we do less of. And this first one is one issue that's at least worth you all thinking about. This is mostly a staff issue, to some extent it's a board issue, as to how much time do we spend justifying how applications meet the criteria. One potential approach that I don't think is ideal, but is to say, if a permit's not valid, it's the person who applies for the permit's responsibility. If we end up privatizing things, we can end up spending less time on things. One approach is to tell applicants, those things you fill out online when you file for a permit, that's the only thing the permit's going to say about why this permit's been granted. Because the idea being, if they do a lousy job, they're the ones whose permit's going to be eventually declared invalid. So, and I bring this both sort of a specific one, but also generally think about, as we cut back, what are the ways we can cut back in ways that are really giving what has been traditionally a staff responsibility onto applicants or onto the public or onto the people.
So what would happen is, people apply now and they just quickly go through the application, sometimes because people don't understand it, they don't get it. Other times because they just don't feel like they need to address the specific criteria in the zoning. Because the application actually mimics exactly what the zoning ordinance says. Is your project in harmony with the goals and objectives of the zoning ordinance? And that's exactly the finding criteria that you all have to make, essentially. But many times applicants don't fill that stuff out, so staff goes through and analyzes the application to see where it may or may not fit these criteria. And at various times we've gone back to the applicants and said, well, you need to, it's your job to pitch it to the board and say, this is why my project's great, this is why I meet the zoning ordinance. But they never really do that, and it's not just individual homeowners who don't quite get zoning. It is many times those larger consulting firms and applicants who don't do it either. So that's what Wayne's referring to is, if we then say, okay, staff isn't gonna go through and analyze your project for you anymore, you have to write it, and if you don't, and someone appeals it and says, well, they haven't shown that they've met the criteria, then it's up to the applicant to, then it's the applicant's burden to, you know, shoulder that appeal essentially and prove why they've shown that they do meet the criteria later.
How does this save money?
Well, Carolyn spends a fair amount of time after meetings writing up the permits, so it's less staff time. That one of the more staff-intensive things that we do is aiding the planning board, trying to take all that discussion over whatever time period it was.
Well, I understand that, but how does that save money?
Where we have fewer bodies or fewer hours of bodies we have. I'm not sure where the cuts are, I'm not sure if it's a full person or a portion of a person, but under any scenario, we're going to be having fewer hours in our office. And wherever it is, I mean, whether it's, whoever it is, we'll be jockeying positions
I
around the
understand,
office. But,
yeah.
So, I'll speak just myself, but over the past 5 years, Carolyn and you have spoiled us in that you evaluate the permit, you do all that legwork, you prep the applicant for where the holes and the weaknesses might be. I don't really go over that permit in detail to look at it, so now you're saying then the burden's gonna be on us at the
No,
meeting to.
not
You're still gonna write staff
No,
recommendations.
not on you, right. When I think about what are the places we're cut back, I mean, we're gonna have cuts, it'll be things that we don't wanna cut. But we also wanna, life will go on, and so we wanna do things that have the least impact. And investments that we make upfront, that is doing a staff report that goes to you, we're continue to make, if anything, that's the area I like to spend more time on, is giving better staff reports. It's afterwards when it goes to writing up the permit itself. Because you guys are focused on what we think and what we have experienced from what you say are the big issues you're focusing on. But when someone appeals a permit, they may be appealing on grounds that have absolutely nothing to do with anything that you discussed. They're going to look through the zoning and all these quirky things that maybe appeal in part. And so part of Carolyn's job is to protect the permits that you voted for, is to make that permit as bulletproof as possible. That's the piece we're going to be spending less time on, saying, hey, applicant, on two levels it could save us money. We spend less staff time afterwards writing up the permit. And the other thing, quite frankly, we've already done this mostly, when you issue a permit and the neighbors appeal the permit, for the most part, we let the applicant defend their own permit. We spend a little bit of legal time there. We're probably going to spend even less legal time there. Janet would do nothing more than put an appearance. She basically just say yes on the city's solicitor, otherwise everyone else uses it. So, is that clear?
Maybe it would, because we see the application, but I don't think I've ever seen a permit, the final thing.
Isn't the application the permit aside from the conditions?
No.
With the condition?
No.
How significantly different is the
Well,
permit?
last week for the Colmorgan, we passed out copies so you could actually see what it was. We went through those criteria. So, but one of didn't we? Or we just did the conditions?
Yeah, you gave us the history of.
So, so one of the things is all the conditions you see. That's exactly what you vote. You get copies of. But we also have to do basically findings of fact. How does this meet the criteria in the zoning?
When we got the latest appeal that was filed on the High Street, was it High Street? The High Street thing, didn't that list, wasn't the permit included as part of that?
Yeah,
So if
they
you
always
look at
do,
that
yeah.
appeal, it will have the permit in it.
It's at the very back.
That's the easiest way to get a hold of them.
I'll tell you quite frankly why I thought of this is never ideal, but we always weigh the amount of resources we have with the priorities. When Carolyn was on maternity leave, and I was covering for her and also doing my own work, I did a lot less findings of fact than Carolyn does. And my permits weren't as good as Carolyn. That just, something had to give and I didn't do it. But so that's part of what we think about this is, okay, we did this for 3 months. It wasn't ideal, but we did it for 3 months. If those permits don't get appealed, it doesn't matter in the slightest, and it's I was lucky, none of my permits got appealed, and so I saved lots of time, and my family appreciated it very much. If one of those permits had been appealed, it wouldn't be quite as strong.
Does this put the planning board at any extra liability?
Yeah, it doesn't put you at liability. It makes it more likely your decisions might be overturned. You know, you come in here and work hard, and ultimately issue a permit that neighbors don't like. Potentially, the neighbor is going to be more likely to prevail in litigation. And that's one of the balances we have to think is, I wouldn't want to issue such such weak permits, that more people appeal them. And then we would lose all the savings that we have. And we're looking for a balance.
But you're not asking the applicant to do any more than what they should be doing.
We're going to try to scare the applicant and do what they should be doing. So
That's
you're
what-
absolutely
So
right.
it's not like you're asking them to.
If you look at the permit applications, those criteria, most of those are laughable. They don't do a very good job at doing it. So that's really the piece, is, you know, how do we get them to take that more seriously? Right, exactly.
Wayne, how about the time, like, if an applicant comes before, when he comes up to the planning department, don't you spend hours with them sometimes, giving them feedback and stuff?
Yeah, and everyone's all over the place as to how much they want to do that. Carol and I both just got yelled at by an applicant who will remain nameless because we didn't call her up and tell her all the things she should have known ahead of time. But she ignored our phone calls when we suggested she meet with us, and when we suggested she give us a draft permit. So people are all over the place. It's a service we offer, and we encourage people to do it. But people are all over the place with it. You know, half the permit, I'm not sure they have it. Some percentage of your permits we never see until the day they arrive at our door. Some percentage we see drafts when we permits on. So, and it's not predictable. Carolyn has a better sense of percentages.
Will you give us training a few more minutes here?
Sure. You can condition a special permit by limiting the, putting a time limit on the validity of it, and the ownership and the use by the applicant.
Isn't that usually like they have 2 years?
That's to start a project, but this is, so you can say, you can conduct this business for 2 years or something, and at the end of 2 years, this permit is null and void.
Or like the light on top of the globe on top of the
Right,
hotel.
right.
But you could also make it only expire if they sell the property, right?
Right.
Huh.
Well, didn't we just do that with that building up in Florence where we changed? One of the zoning changes was so you could make an artist space.
Oh, live workspace
The
with
workspace. But if he
with
sells the building, was there a condition that if he sold the building, it reverted?
I don't know if you're thinking about the
That was a
development
deed
agreement.
restriction,
Oh, okay.
right? That was a deed restriction you put in the Florence, whatever that was.
Which one?
The museum with the work,
The Nantucket Street.
Oh.
the work behind.
Oh, that one.
No, I meant the one
That's
across
what I
the
thought.
street. No, across the street.
You meant the original one that we changed the zoning.
Right, that one.
Oh, that's
That's
one
what-
that we just,
Right, I
Well,
thought.
that wasn't a
okay, all right.
permit, that was zoning, and maybe you're thinking about the development agreement that was, offered.
Oh, was that what it was?
Yeah, so that is recorded at with the land.
Okay.
Um,
It was a month ago and I've already forgot.
So you can't condition a permit, based on someone else's agreeing to, or conforming to someone else's rules. The permit is in front of you, and you have to make the decision.
This is one that comes up a lot on the technical stuff. This technical stuff is not that exciting, where you might want to say, the inclination is to say, this is fine, subject to DPW approval. That you can't just like give approval where someone wouldn't know, among other things, they wouldn't know whether to appeal the permit or not, because they wouldn't know what the actual outcome is. It's fine to give a couple of scenarios. So you might want to say, you're going to have one coming up, it's probably going to be staff recommendation, where you might say, a sewer line can be 12 feet if they post an escrow, or it could be 10 feet if they don't post an escrow because it's more expensive for us to dig up old sewer lines. So you may not know what the outcome is, but both solutions have to be spelled out. You couldn't say, at the end of the day, the permit's approved subject to DPW deciding where the sewer line should be, because then that would be impermissibly delegating what's your responsibility.
But it is also different than if you could say, this permit is approved, and you have to meet the standards for water line connections that are determined by DPW, because those are set standards that are out there. It's just you don't have to spell them out in your permit. Does that make sense, the difference?
What if there was some question about whether some condition was fulfilled and we delegate the planning department, the staff to approve it?
But that's enforcement, that's different, that's fine.
That's what?
That's enforcement, that's a different thing.
Oh, okay.
You can certainly enforce, you always do, as a building inspector, generally is the enforcement agent.
Variances, we've talked about this a little bit. It's essentially a waiver of the zoning, and the zoning board can only grant a variance on specific criteria, soil conditions or hardship, and if it meets the public good. So not anybody can just come in and ask for a variance, but the zoning board is really supposed to act in accordance with these specific criteria in the state statute. Did this come from?
Animation.
How do you do that?
Site plan approval, you're looking at the, again, we talked about this, the way the use functions on the site, the appearance, the safety, environmental impacts, parking, utilities, lighting, and screening. And in the zoning, our zoning specifically says whenever you apply for a special permit, it also includes review of the site plan. And you cannot deny a site plan based on the use. It has to be based on technical imperfections of the site that can't be overcome with conditions or other changes. And the site plan review is not spelled out in state statute. So it's been one of these things that's been added onto and gone and allowed through it's case law, right? It's essentially identified what the parameters are for site plan.
This is important to sort of where state law may be changing. We're what's called a home rule state since 1966. So anything the state legislature hasn't told us we can't do, we can do. So you have enormous authorities to pass different kinds of regulations. This so-called zoning reform effort, which in some ways is supposed to give municipalities more tools, which is, much of it is good, but one of the risks of it is when they start saying specifically, for example, site plan is allowed, they might be saying site plan is allowed, and here's how site plan works. And some people have argued that actually may be taking away our tools because they tell us how site plan works. Then you can't simply say, oh, I want to do something that's totally different for site plan.
Even though we're home rule, we really aren't. They tell us what to do all the time. So special permits are regulations about the use, and site plan is used to shape a project and not to deny a project.
I think the entire company on the board would never reject a site plan. So you're saying it's not possible to reject a site plan?
Right, unless there's something, let's say traffic mitigation you can't mitigate for the tremendous traffic impacts that a project creates, then, but that has to be specifically spelled out, that there's not anything that the applicant can possibly do to change the scenario.
In most of the court cases, courts is similar actually. They say site plan can't be turned down except for in exceptional circumstances, and it's not in this circumstance. So I'm not aware of any court cases where the court actually found a time you could do it. The example I often give is, if this isn't Northampton, but if the zoning allowed Walmart in any zoning district, so someone wanted to do Walmart on Sylvester Road, you could argue there's no amount of improvements Walmart could make to the traffic system to accommodate that amount of traffic. The place where it's fine to turn out a site plan, which comes up more often, is you have an applicant, you say, project's going on King Street, and you say, I need to see a design for a full signal. And the applicant says, no, I'm not going to give you that design. You can certainly deny it because of lack of information. But that would mean if he came back and gave you a design, then you'd be approving it.
So you can apply conditions, as you all know, maintenance requirements, landscaping, parking, sewer connections, police details during heavy traffic periods. You guys should pull that out of the pocket one time. Majority of those present vote. So it's different from special permit.
What was
Whoa,
special?
go back to that.
Back up again.
The second bullet, that's nothing we've ever abided by, right? If we miss a public hearing, we never vote.
Right, that's the same, that's the thing where you have to, well, now this standard has, is this updated?
This is changed, yeah.
What's that?
That's the correct one.
Yeah, this is the new one. So this is where they just recently changed statute, where if you adopt locally, that you have an allowance for people who miss hearings to be able to review all the documentation that comes forward from a hearing, and you certify that you've done that, then you can vote on the final action. But we haven't adopted that measure locally.
No, we have adopted it.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, City Council adopted, so the law passed 2 years ago, City Council passed it last year. But one of the evidence you have to have is either verbatim transcripts, a video recording, or a tape recording. So we haven't done that yet and figured out the resources to do that piece. But so we could do that, but and you're only allowed to miss one meeting.
Well, we have Adam.
Adam.
We've had five.
Sometimes, not always is.
Well, that's what the city council just did with the bid when a bunch of people weren't there. They had to watch the video. Remember? Well, people watched.
I remember.
Yeah.
Well, certainly in the long run, nothing against this videotaping, but we don't know if this is here. Long run, you know, this hopefully someday the cable system will be automated here, and all your meetings get recorded and go on to DVD, and then it becomes easy.
Alrighty.
Could an applicant then, if they came in front of us and there weren't enough, as many people as the applicant wanted, can they force those people who missed the meeting, who if it got continued for whatever reason, to review and sign off and vote on the second meeting, which makes the city responsible to provide everybody with the information that they missed?
If there wasn't a quorum.
Are you
Or if there was
talking just
or-
about public hearing?
Or even if there's a quorum, because maybe the applicant doesn't like the
Right, the
quorum.
makeup of the
Right.
quorum.
Yeah.
I mean, we can have a quorum, but 3 people could be missing.
Yeah,
Those
yeah.
3 people are, if it's adopted locally,
It's an interesting question. I mean, certainly couldn't absent us having that tape recording, because then there's nothing for the person to record.
right.
But the question would be, if there was a tape recording, could you mandate someone to do it? I don't know the answer. It's
Right,
interesting.
if the applicant brings a tape recorder, just in case,
Right.
and finds out, better whip out the tape recorder, because the 3 people I want aren't here.
Right. Certainly, so, you know, we do offer applicants choice. You know, if some night you come in here and there's only 5 of you, and there's a special permit, we tend to tell the applicant, this is going to require a unanimous vote. Do you want to go forward, or do you want to ask for continuance? And sometimes applicants do ask for continuance, but it's an interesting question. I don't know.
So this is about construction approval of site plans. Because site plan isn't a part of the state statute, there's no real statutory guidance on the decisions. But in Northampton, we've said that site plan, you follow the same procedures for site plan as you do special permit. So it follows the constructive approval. Do you all know what constructive approval is?
No.
If you don't, constructive approval is if you don't act upon a permit application in the time period specified in the state statute, then the applicant can go to the city clerk and get a certification that the time period is lapsed from which you all had an opportunity to essentially make a decision about a project. And so you don't ever want that constructive approval to happen because well, for site plan, it's different from special permit because you would rarely deny a project, but you certainly couldn't condition. Any of the conditions that you might have thought about for a project would not ever see the light of day. Applicant can just do whatever they want because they've got a constructive grant. So, we've specified that it's consistent, it's the same as special permit in Northampton. And we're always watching that clock. But you can also extend the time periods with an agreement with the applicant, which you all have done a
We've
lot.
done that.
Yeah. So, this is about, freezing, section 6 is actually about non-conforming, uses, and, also about, once you get a permit, under subdivision, you have a provision where if you come forth and you get an approval for a subdivision, that is effective depending on whether it's A&R or full subdivision for either 3 or 8 years. So if zoning changes in the time after you've gotten your approval, you still get to go back to the old zoning for 8 years. There's no such same thing for site plan approval. So in site plan approval, the appeals go to court. When it's connected to a building permit, the decision is about the issuance of a building permit, and that goes, it gets appealed directly to court too, though, doesn't it?
Because we said so in our zoning ordinance. You can spell,
Oh,
this is
that's-
absent that.
Okay. So, how much more do you guys want to, you guys know about this set, we probably don't need to go through these. This is from, by the way, this is a standard training manual that, this organization takes around to all communities. So there's some things that you guys already know about, side yard setbacks and front yard setbacks. So tell me when you want to stop, but we can go into subdivision control.
Let's stop.
Carolyn, can you email that to us? Presentation?
Yeah, that'd be great.
What did you say, Steve?
Email.
Could you email the presentation?
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to suggest if we keep having these kind of slow nights when we have moments for training like this, that a good piece of training might be use of these tables of uses. I don't think I've ever really grasped them and used them as they have meant to be, during our discussion during years. So just to walk through these, and for some of you who do understand them pretty well, to help explain them would be great.
Actually, we've, over the years, the table use isn't the easiest thing to read, but at least it's all in one place.
Yeah.
So over the years, we've actually tried, when I first got here, there were the table use regulations and the table dimensional regulations. And it seemed like an awful lot of zoning was all the exceptions. We started trying to move them in as the tables, not pretty, but at least it's all in one place.
Right, yeah.
I think there's still more opportunities to do that. I'd like to get rid of a whole section of zoning and put it in one place.
What about reviewing the open meeting law? Isn't there gonna be a?
Okay. Should we,
Yeah, there's some, in this same thing we have.
do we have our elections? Okay,
No wonder you were keeping it.
the first regular meeting held during each calendar year, which, oops, I thought this was in March, supposed to be in the first meeting in March.
We still keep promoting by 11.
We changed the zoning.
Whatever works. I don't know.
Because March
If they got a
someplace.
video camera set up, then I could do it remotely.
You could watch it all.
That works for
Skype
me.
it, Skype it.
Skype, there you go. I could just put a monitor in that.
We certainly had people
Anyway,
who lived
we're
out
gonna-
in the area.
We're gonna elect a new chair and vice chair, and also do committee appointments. Do you have the list of committees?
I nominate Randy.
Oh, you guys did, that's why it was on my desk. Yes.
A planning board member may serve as chair or vice chair for 3 consecutive years, after which she shall not be eligible to be nominated for the same position until 1 year has passed. However, 2/3 vote of the board can waive this provision. I don't know if it's, I've been on here for 3 years, but it seems like 3 years.
Possibly
Seems
not.
like that.
Um,
My kid's
You just
been
use
at
our weighted-
almost 4, so it must be.
yeah. But what's this thing about the March meeting? I don't understand that.
Well, the terms are up in March, so that's why
Well, maybe that's, okay.
you guys go through this.
Anyway, this is the meeting where we're going to elect a new chairman, and I guess we would like to have nominations for a new chairman.
I'll nominate Steve Gilson.
Second.
Anyone else? Okay, that's, all in favor? Everybody gets a
You
vote.
have to officially do roll call it.
Okay,
Steve, how do you,
Madam-
wait, who's second?
George did,
Okay,
Jen did.
Jen did,
okay.
they
So,
both did.
Steve,
Can I vote for me?
yes you can.
Say, sure.
So we have to cancel it.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Mark,
Say,
Ken,
Yes.
Keith,
Yep.
Jen.
Yes.
What about Fran? Doesn't he get the?
Oh, Fran is.
she'll get to me. Yep.
You wanna hold on to it? George? Mary?
Yes.
Yes.
I think the yes, the ayes have it.
Now, to help Steve out, you guys are gonna have to start working harder at doing the motions, because I'm not gonna be here to.
Can we add that to this list of the designated motion maker?
Designated.
Oh, no, as retiring chairman, I officially become
The motion maker.
a motion maker.
That's a
Because
good.
you know how hard it is for
And
them
I
to
was hoping
decide.
we were gonna have 3 motion makers, but we're still gonna have at least 2, so. Counting, I mean, the major motion makers.
Okay, well,
I'm getting better.
Well, you know, yeah. we've
George
gotta-
made a few motions.
We've gotta work on that, you know, we've gotta give people the opportunity to make motions and kind of train. It's not something you just jump right into,
Yeah.
so, really.
I've seconded a lot of motions.
But it's usually, that's adjourned.
that's
And that counts, I guess, so.
Okay.
All right, then there's another officer, the vice chair.
excuse me, doesn't he now take over?
Oh, here it goes.
Yeah. Neat step.
2 officers, chair and vice chair.
He's hanging on to the end.
2 officers, chair and vice chair shall be elected by a majority of the quorum at the first meeting in March of each calendar year. So that's, the committees are supposed to be appointed in the first meeting of the year, which they sort of were. Associate members are permitted to participate in the election. But I don't think associate members can serve as vice chairman. Oh, are there nominations for vice chair?
I'll nominate Jen.
Is there a
It's
second?
like,
You know, this isn't just weight gain, you're eating too many cookies or something.
it'll be fine.
Look, Steve's attendance record
It's
is 97%,
excellent,
so.
yeah.
Oh.
I have reviewed that thoroughly.
Yeah, he's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be out a bit. Or maybe I'll be here more, because it's gonna be more fun to be here.
Your attendance will go up.
There you go, John, it
Her
started
husband
early
said he
this
thought he
time,
would
I
be here
don't know
more, she
why.
would be here more.
Yeah, you can tell me you have to chair it, so you have to be there.
That's right, at 6.
Good luck with that crying.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
It's gonna mean it's gonna.
was there a second on that?
I'll second that.
So, okay, somebody seconded it. Any other nominations? All in favor? Another roll call?
Steve,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
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 Fran.
Yes. You let me-
Jen.
you leave it.
Yes. George. Mary.
Yes. No.
Can't wait until you start video meetings so I can watch them.
Unanimous.
Okay, now the question is, can I give this to you now, or do you want to wait till the end of the meeting? Or whatever. Yeah. Whatever.
Does, Marilyn or Mark move up into Keith's slot?
Well,
How does that-
I understand understand that the mayor is going to move Marilyn up. She's the senior of the two associate members.
Oh, that's already been done.
Yeah, it's already been
And
done. I haven't been sworn in, but,
the city council approved it already?
yeah,
Oh, is it a rubber stamp kind of a thing?
kind of. Oh. No, it was.
You were well known to the city
It did
council.
go before city council, and I think that they recommended approving it because I was already serving as the city council. It was approved last Thursday,
They didn't make
But-
you go back through the ringer.
but no, but not to take effect until I think the 16th.
Today's my last
Oh, so we couldn't have you as vice chairman yet. Anyways.
The 16th of March, like in 4 days?
Too late.
She could be the vice chair.
So, talking about
I'll
appointments,
support Jen.
Thanks.
I've been the planning board's rep on the Transportation and Parking Commission. I am trying to see if we can find someone else to fill a transportation role on the board, but I haven't found anyone yet. But it'd be good if someone who had at least inkling of interest in transportation.
And here,
Those are hard to come by.
you know, I hadn't even thought about that committee because I was only worried about who was gonna read this god-awful traffic reports. And, you know, you're the only one that seemed to be interested in those things. I think that Ken, we ought to get Ken off the tree committee and put him on the transportation committee. You know more about transportation than you do about trees.
Probably.
I was impressed how much you knew about trees.
Well, we need to have somebody in the tree committee.
How about Marilyn?
I think you don't have-
You are free, because you're not vice
When does the
chair.
tree committee meet?
It's the 4th Tuesday of the month,
What time?
6:30, at the DPW.
Next question, how long?
Yeah,
Sorry.
right.
And who's on it?
You don't have to decide it now. It's gonna the next meeting of the Transportation Park Commission is the 17th. It's next Tuesday, right? And I was gonna try and make that meeting. Say my goodbyes, but
Well, it'd be a good time to announce your successor.
yeah.
So, Keith, so you mentioned that you're actually looking around Northampton for somebody else who might want to join the planning board who's got some background in,
Transportation.
Yep.
And I had one person who had shown an interest in the board, but their jobs just moved, so they're not gonna be able to make the time commitment, so.
I think that I did hear the mayor say at the last city council meeting, she was committed to finding someone for transportation.
I feel as if I could try.
Well, we could have somebody maybe go temporarily if we are waiting. But like, there's no full board position available for transportation.
So it would be a new associate?
Can the representative be an associate member?
Yeah, it just has to be
Yeah.
planning board.
Oh, associate's
Okay.
board committee.
That's right.
All right.
Keith, does it have to be confirmed by council,
Well,
the transportation and parking?
I don't believe so, it's one of our, I think it's the planning board's.
It's definitely planning board slot, but I wasn't sure if council.
No, it's the I think the planning board, it's like the housing partnership and the tree committee.
Jen, okay, so that's that. We don't have somebody here that wants to be on transportation committee. The old list was wrong because Catherine has long since taken over on the bicycle and pedestrian committee.
Huh? Was that the only thing that was wrong?
I was on
No.
capital improvements.
No, just,
But I'll probably, I mean, actually for capital improvements,
there used to be.
because I'm the zoning
subcommittee.
revisions committee now, so I would be, I'm open to give up capital improvements, because we're gonna be meeting a couple times a month with zoning revisions. So,
And Jen said you do the housing committee, which has been an open position before. That's great. Terrific.
but if somebody wants to do capital improvements,
When do they meet?
It
And typically they meet, the way it's been in the past, they meet every week. It was like a Wednesday from 5 on, and they meet for 8 weeks in a row, just to get it done. Every city department comes in, and you just do it. So you have to commit to, a bunch of Wednesdays, and then you don't meet it. And actually, this year, I mean, I assume it'll happen again in the fall like it did last year,
It's
but
in the fall.
will
Yeah,
it even
science
happen?
is August though, right? Science is August and September.
August, September, but whether or not it happens this year, there's so little money.
Right.
But it's an interesting committee. Every city department goes through, gives you their needs. George, I think you've been on it before. So you get a good view of what's going on in the city in terms of needs and budgets. So I find it interesting.
It's also, in the long term, it should be a much more important committee tied to sustainable Northampton. In an ideal world, many towns don't do this. Capital improvements is supposed to be how you implement a comprehensive plan. And our capital improvements project has worked really well for the short term, but it hasn't been as much of a visionary process of, where are we setting sewer lines to match the comprehensive plan, or where, those kinds of things. We should move towards that.
Well, things like the rescue of the Mill River that was talked about last night, that would be like a capital improvement.
That would be, although almost certainly that would be a grant funded project.
Sure.
George, you have the floor.
From my experience, they often, what they lacked on that panel was somebody from like the private sector and somebody with construction experience to kind of look at those and just get a good perspective on what real costs are for doing roofs or buying automobiles and things like that.
Yeah, I'd be up for that.
But they really,
I think it's an interesting subject,
Yeah.
if it's interesting.
Okay, what else have we got? That's awesome.
The only other one I was going to say is if somebody, with technical review, I think there's 3 of us going to that.
Yeah, I have, Brandy, Ken, and Steve. That meets as needed on the, first and third Tuesday morning,
It's
7:30.
been
We haven't been.
less often than once a month.
Yeah.
If one of us shows up, we're usually lucky, but.
That's a good day for me to be in the morning.
Yeah, we haven't met in a while.
Are you trying to get off of that?
I don't know, I was thinking, but no, I mean, I like that one. Tuesday mornings work well for me because I'm here.
That's the best committee, the best one to go to.
Seven.
I was gonna opt for that
It's the
one.
most interesting one. I'll stay in the CAC, I guess.
Okay, so we have Ed Lou, Ken, and George.
be good to have
Oh, I'll
somebody.
go to Ed Lou.
You wanna do Ed Lou?
I'll do
Oh,
it.
great.
Because that's,
I guess Ken's off Ed Lou.
Well,
it's during the day and,
It's a good time for me, and
Yeah.
I've been on Ed Lou, so,
oh, that's perfect.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
George, you wanna stay on?
No, not necessarily.
Doesn't need 2 people.
Don't hide, George.
Yeah, but I didn't know if someone
No, I
else.
mean, are you willing to stay on?
No, I think it was good before Ken and I split it because of our difficulties in getting there, but if Maryland
I'll do
can
Ed Lou.
really do it on a regular basis, it's better to have one person go there. But you represent the planning board, you don't
I
represent
understand.
the city.
And thank you very much.
And Maryland, it's not formally a voting member.
It's fine
Now-
with me.
Is there anybody that doesn't have anything to do?
So PVPC, George, you'll stay on?
Yeah.
Um,
And the community preservation committee, that's not on the list either, I don't.
That's a separate responsibility of yours,
oh,
or
yeah.
not?
Well, it's like the transportation committee, the planning board appoints a member to be on.
Oh, it is a member,
But
so
George,
that has to get added
Is that
on.
only 1 year term? I think you're in a longer term.
Yeah, I think it's a 3-year term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we still wanna note that you're very
Right.
active by participating in that as well.
Very.
And you get to vote on that. You're not just an observer, you're a voter.
Right.
Yeah, no,
Well,
that's,
just
that's,
like I think, or the housing partnership, most of the ones, except for the EDLU, because that's kind of a city council
Yeah, it's a
subcommittee.
city council.
But most of the other ones, you're kind of a voting member, like the capital improvements, right, for what it's worth, you voted on the priorities.
Right.
And then the mayor does.
Then she does what she wants to. Yeah, that's right.
so it's, so who's on the tree committee?
Well, we don't know, so let's make our way up. So then we have city, we have transportation, City Transportation Committee, and then, why do I have two transportation committees?
Because there's, I think one of them's supposed to be the bike and ped subcommittee, which is like a subcommittee of the transportation and parking commissions.
Should I put a little asterisk, temporary?
Yeah.
A temporary asterisk?
Steroid use.
And that would also go for the, so then we already have you as bike ped, so do we even need to replace Keith? I have you on the list for,
Yeah, those two are never there. That's what Catherine goes to, the subcommittee. I
okay.
still don't understand why there's two transportation committees. So I think that somehow
Let's
that's
do
gotta
this.
be straightened out.
Yeah, I got it, I got you.
Okay,
Okay, so then we just have the tree committee.
Which meets Tuesday at 6 or
That's
something?
a tough time for me.
I honestly, I don't mind doing that.
What about Mark?
Well,
What
if, he's
are you
on
doing?
C,
I'll do it, yeah, the capital improvement.
well, if you're you're only temporary, maybe it won't be that many meetings for you on transportation, you just keep your tree slot.
6 weeks.
Alright, so you wanna stick with the road?
well,
Yeah, and I'll take the other one with an asterisk.
you know how quickly a new member will be appointed.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
So, Carolyn, do you have listed,
Where?
do you have on your table or your list the zoning revisions?
Yes,
Now, I see it's noted in the paper as the rezoning committee. What is it being called now?
no, there was no name change, I think the paper probably decided to do it.
So I think it's kind of important that we call it the zoning revisions committee as opposed to, and you'll need to maybe hammer that home at first. I mean,
Otherwise, I guess the zoning rezoning committee.
Wait a minute, we had a committee on the committee.
I guess that when the committee meets, they perhaps could choose their own name, but I think the ordinance stated that
There
it
was
was a
no,
zoning
there was no
revision.
discussion of a name change, so I
Yeah.
don't know why that,
What was your concern?
In fact, there was no precedent.
It's called the rezoning committee?
Zoning revisions.
Revision.
No, but in the
Oh.
paper, they call it the
No.
rezoning committee,
Well,
which
they
I
didn't do
think,
anything right.
Yeah, Dave had talked about that.
It was good. I mean, I could give you an overview of the meeting we had. We had our first meeting. It was good. It was, they're a good group of people. I think they're all pretty motivated. We spent most of the time discussing the charter, open meeting law, how we're gonna conduct the meetings, whether or not we're gonna do Robert's Rules of Order or do consensus. Carolyn was there, and she's going to be doing at the next meeting a 1-hour training on zoning. Probably a lot of what I imagine you just showed us.
Probably focus more on yeah.
But applicable to zoning. But there's definitely a good amount of energy. People who are either familiar with the sustainability plan or going to be familiar with it. And there's one guy who's going to be setting up a website, so we'll be able to post all the documents that we use. I think much like the sustainability committee did on their website, so there'll be a link to the site from the Northampton website. So we haven't quite gotten around to actually deciding any revisions, and I think it's going to be a few meetings before we do. But I think there's going to be training, kind of discussion about how we want to work, and then start looking at the prioritized list that we're supposed to come up with before we're really going to start banging away. In fact, we probably spent, I think it was a half an hour trying to figure out when we could meet, because somebody had a conflict with it every day of the week. It was just, the hardest part was just finding dates where we could meet.
There was a different person that had a conflict every day.
Every day, every weekday, there was somebody who had a conflict.
When are you meeting?
So now we're down to the first and third Wednesdays of every month.
What
So-
time?
7 o'clock.
As needed.
Right. We're scheduling 2 meetings a month,
What time of day?
first and third Wednesdays at 7 p.m.
Where do you meet?
We met here.
Wherever there's available space,
Right.
probably, we'll try to get here. I haven't checked for the April 1st meeting. And in fact, Wayne is actually, I forgot to mention, I didn't want to throw it into the pool anyway, but until May, I can't do Wednesday, so Wayne's gonna do Wednesday.
So April, so
The
the
April
training,
meetings.
oh, Wayne, you'll do the training for us.
Yeah, but it's realized, what day is that?
April 1st.
I think I conflict that.
Oh, yeah, this is what it was like Wednesday.
Well, it's usually fine. I just went to East Hampton before I got here, and they have a city council meeting at night about the bike path.
Right.
But I mean to go to, but I'll figure out time there.
Steve, did you say the group found a chair and a vice chair already?
No, I said what we decided we would do is wait a few meetings, because nobody knew each other.
Yeah.
And so right now I'm chairing the meetings, but I said in a couple of meetings, we'll pick a chair and a vice chair. I think it's for the beginning, just, so people there are 3 or 4 people who've been on city boards, who feel very comfortable, but most of the other ones hadn't even been on a board before. So that's why we talked about the open meeting law for a while. Alex Giesland was there, he gave a little bit of talk on best practices. So it's more like, I think we're trying to figure out how we're gonna work as a committee. And then after that, people will probably have a good idea of who's, would be a good chair. It was a good meeting. We're trying to do, a little over 2 hours. I was trying to limit it to 2 hours so people don't get burnt out. Plus, everybody was going to the Notre Dame meeting the next day. And then next Tuesday, we invited them to the Zero Lot Line meeting, which I think, Carolyn, you're doing at Bridge Street. Tuesday. So, I didn't want to overwhelm them.
Great.
Right.
There's some smart people on that committee, but
Yeah.
they probably know a lot about the zoning training, right? But
Some of them do. Some of them,
Yeah,
one of the guys teaches.
the other key piece that they felt would be good, that even if some people knew about zoning, that, because, it would, since we had video coverage, that would go up on the web, and then everybody could learn about zoning if they really wanted to. Or the difference between zoning and planning and other regulations.
And the sustainability plan is something that,
Well, that drives this committee, because this committee was founded only because of the sustainability plan.
but I mean, that's gonna get reviewed, so everybody's kind of up to speed on what's in the sustainability.
Right. We gave copies of the sustainability plan to everybody that night. We also gave them the zoning book, so they walked out of it with, 300 pages of
Homework.
very dense material to read. So,
So we're not seeing it.
I'm a little scared to show them the second meeting.
do the end of it.
Let's see, there's some good people on there.
Yeah. So,
Did you try and schedule meetings before or after you gave them?
Right.
it's like herding cats.
Okay, do we, are we all done with the committees, subcommittees, liaisons?
Do you want me to run through them again, or you
Sure.
guys all set?
No, go ahead. Reinforce it.
Housing partnership, we have Jen.
When's that meet again?
If it's still the same, 3rd Tuesday of each month, is that right?
Each year.
Okay, that means I teach Tuesday nights until the first week of May, so I'll just let Gordon know, the chair.
That'd be
Well,
great.
nobody's been going for months.
Right, so I'm gonna be next.
Capital improvements, Mark and Wayne. Tech review, Tracy, Ken and Steve. Tree committee, Ken. Transportation, Wayne and Ken temporarily until a new person is appointed. Catherine is on the bike ride subcommittee. PVPC, George and Wayne is the alternate. Edlu, Marilyn.
That meets on Monday
Yes.
at 1.
Yeah, is it 1 or 1:30?
The second Monday of every month, I think, at 1.
Second Monday,
And CPC is George and ZRC is Steve.
Okay.
Oh,
That's
did I skip
awesome.
that? Oh, yeah, I did.
Um,
CPC is right. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any minutes to go over? We don't. Okay, that, on the agenda was sustainable Northampton implementation. What do we have to do about that?
Well, one of the things that came up at the meeting on Tuesday with zoning revisions committee was they looked at this. We talked about it. You guys haven't gone through and determined priorities for some of these ones that haven't yet been addressed or looked at, I brought some copies if you didn't, you guys didn't bring them, I can also put it up on the screen if you want. So, that would be sort of the next task, is to go through these. A question did come up, you guys can share too. And, you know, questions came up in terms of determining sort of what the priorities are, but also are there funding priorities that, which things need to be addressed more quickly so that we could get in line for funds like the Green Communities Act stuff.
Which edition is this anyway?
Well, it's an addition. It's the one and only that we're working from. There's another one.
My suggestion is that anytime one of these is revised, that it has a revision date on it, so we can identify it. That's true of any document.
Carol, you put this up here?
What's that?
You put this up on the screen too?
Yeah, I can do that.
Do you have the right version?
She doesn't know, it is what it is.
No, I have the one that,
Get it
Of
over
course,
with.
George was the only one who was paying attention, so he didn't know.
I don't think that's true, Frandy, but I appreciate the compliment.
okay, let's see.
Yeah, I think the reason when we talked about this Tuesday is, while they do want, I mean, the zoning revisions committee does want priorities from us. They still may change them. They may say, well, so, yeah, I know. So, but I think they, as Carolyn said, what they were, it came up, you know, people didn't want to know, are any of these tied to money, grants, or any other thing that the city needs in order to get funding? So that was something that I think, Wayne, I thought you would point out a few of these that were.
Yeah, we did an assessment for the green communities, and we don't think we need to make zoning changes to qualify. We may want to make zoning changes to strengthen where we are. You need to have either allow manufacturing of renewable energy or siting renewable energy sites by right, and we allow manufacturing. So maybe we want to do more, but we need it there. There's one area that's, you get credit if it was called the Energy Stretch Code, and we don't have that. It's not a crisis, but it might be useful to do. I'm not sure it's going to go fast enough to really work.
Can I ask a question? The West Street design guidelines, that committee has been formed or hasn't been formed? I'm on this, but I don't know who else is on it. Or
We have a committee, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission is going to do the background work for us. So the committee is not going to form until PVPC does some work for us. So we're set to go, but that's just on hold while they think to.
Have the other members been appointed?
Where are we at this? Do you remember? Can't remember.
Do you know what the schedule is with the background information that has to be assembled?
I don't. We said we haven't got. They haven't given us the formal go ahead to. They haven't gotten the final sign off to go ahead. They're still waiting.
Is it likely to happen this year?
I think so. Oh yeah, absolutely this year. I think it's probably 2 months of work once they start. I'm just not sure when that time is.
So this summer maybe, or fall, or something like that?
Good guess, yeah.
In an ideal world, wouldn't it be good for this committee to meet with the PVPC before they do their work, to understand what they're doing and maybe give them a little guidance on, only in an ideal world. Maybe that's already been laid out. That's already been laid out in the scope of work for the PVPC.
Yeah, it's a tiny budget, so we're really getting some graphics up. I'm not sure they're doing any discretion. There's two parts of this. One is figuring what's there now, and the other is figuring where we want to go. And if we get to where we want to go, absolutely. If it's just sort of documenting what's actually on the site, I think it's just documenting what's there. But that works well. But yes, once we figure out when they
This
actually
is the
start.
big picture.
Once we know what their scope is, we can figure out.
So are we gonna spend some time throwing out our own individual priorities tonight?
Why don't you?
How about
about we go around the room and everybody take one?
One of the ones I think that I was curious about, Wayne, because actually it's on the list twice, cluster rewrite from existing model. This is the work, I think you mentioned that you guys did a lot of work on it before the sustainability plan kicked off.
That's right.
Do you feel that that work is still viable?
I do. I think we should always read it. So that was originally a contract with Joe Russell, actually, when we had a state grant. And then you all spent some sessions on it, and we rewrote it heavily, but his was still sort of a kernel for doing it. I don't think I've opened it in 2 years, so I'm sure we want to make some changes, but yes, as a point to start with, knowing it's not going to be exactly the way it's there.
Right, but you think it's in a state that we could probably pass it off to them?
Yeah. I mean, I think this goes back to the bigger discussion. It sounds like you have. There may be some big paradigm shifts that come out of this that change everything. In which case, maybe the cluster would become out of date. But I just think, if, for example, we're doing form-based code, that's a 5-year process.
Well,
I hate to wait for some of those things.
Right. We talked about that some of the things that we're going to look at are going to be multi-year, or we may form little ad hoc groups off of the zoning revisions committee who may examine things in more depth.
Yeah.
So.
For the cluster, I was really nervous about because I don't think we have a great ordinance until a year ago. Now the market's collapsed, there's a little less time pressure, but not much less. We just got we were just notified that a subdivision that you've now approved preliminary plan on twice seems to be back alive again. This is Kensington Estates off of Route 66 in Glendale Road. And I would have thought, this project's been before us for 15 years. I would have thought now's not the time it's going to come back alive, but they've asked for a neighborhood meeting, so it's always hard to predict.
So that was I was like, cluster was,
I think that's great. I wanna raise something that I'm not sure where it fits in here, but and I'm not sure I even understand how it works. But Beaver Brook and a couple other places, it was a cluster development, it was a subdivision, but it was also they used a kind of it seemed like a loophole by naming the properties as condos and having a condo association.
Yeah. I didn't like that loophole at all.
And I think it's used somewhere else or in other places, and I wonder how that fits into, or we can define that better so that we're aware of how that works within the zoning or within the subdivision.
So two things, maybe they're not in the same direction. They're not exactly understanding the concern, but
That's very likely.
So two things. One is this board deliberately encouraged that 15 years ago now, when we wrote a cluster before, to say, this sort of all started with Albert Place in South Hadley, was one of the first ones that was out there, where they did single family homes instead of townhouses, but they did them as a single D condominium project. And so it was a very deliberate effort on the board to say, maybe it's okay to have detached homes, and so we allow that as part of the cluster regulations. And so if we're wrong, we should come back and revisit that. The second half, which certainly came up from Beaver Brook, was a concern: are people going to single-family homes as condos just to avoid the subdivision regulations, just so they can put in shoddy infrastructure? And if you remember, you introduced an ordinance. We had the first public hearing on that a month ago. That zoning ordinance included two things. One was making the subdivision standards the default technical standards for all special permits. The other was redoing the traffic mitigation thing. And because that was more complicated, you continued that public hearing to your next meeting, March 26th. But that ordinance, if it passes, would suddenly make the default. It would make a rebuttable presumption that all projects should meet those technical performance standards. And then it comes before you can say, well, I don't really mean that in this case.
So that was the only reason the developer went the condo route?
No, he had other reasons too, and Carolyn tried to take Ben and I
I
go
thought
all
it
reasons.
was frontage. It was easier to get the frontage because you only need.
I was trying to avoid the water.
Trying to avoid the water line issue because we wouldn't give some waivers for streets. So, like the 500 foot dead end street requirement doesn't exist in condos where it does exist if it's a public street. So my own feeling, George, and you obviously disagree if you want, is it's not the single family homes as condos that's the problem, it's the technical part. You know, if we don't want driveways to be more than 500 feet, just like roads, we should amend that and say driveways shouldn't be more than 500 feet. So he was looking at there were a series of loopholes, if you will.
And the other thing is you guys can grant waivers from your subdivision rules. So if you wanted to grant a waiver from the water requirements or any other requirements, there are specific criteria in the subdivision rules that allow you to do that, one of which is if they're providing affordable housing. That, under the subdivision approval, you were going to require that the offset would be affordable housing. And sometimes that's not necessarily the first thing that the applicant wants to provide. So in that sense, you might be thinking of that in terms of a loophole of going through the cluster instead of the subdivision, because you do have some required offsets for some waivers.
Practically, we're seeing them more now, I think, both because the cost of infrastructure has gone up so much that people are trying to save costs in that, but even more before the market collapse, when housing prices were going up so dramatically, there'd always been sort of a discount that condos weren't worth quite as much as single-family homes. But I think Bear Hill sort of showed that wasn't true anymore in Northampton, and then Beaverbrook became it. So Bear Hill was sort of the first of those kinds of high-end projects, and Pat came forward and thought, oh great, the market's opened up now in the second. It remains to be seen what happens this summer, whether you can sell units there or not.
But if there's a cluster development that looks like a subdivision, can't this all be rolled into one and have a cluster, special kind of subdivision?
Welcome to one of the horrible things about Massachusetts. Massachusetts is very much has our regulations in boxes, and cluster regulations, the subdivision regulations are here, and zoning are here. And they're really totally different things. You could change zoning so you regulate for condos the same thing you regulate for subdivisions, but they're two different documents.
You know, about the cluster, one of the things that's in that rewrite of the cluster actually is to eliminate a lot of the reasons why people even go to subdivisions, to build subdivisions, is just to create frontage so you can have buildable lots. So the idea of building a road is really so you can create that required frontage. But we don't necessarily want to encourage people just to build roads. If there's a better way to design a project without roads, and maybe the houses don't all have 75 feet of frontage and are exactly lined up along a street, but you could cluster the units in a way that protects the land, and you're not building all this new pavement and curbing and all this other stuff. So the cluster rewrite really is a radical change from the cluster that we had before by saying, you know, you don't need to create frontage with it. If you do it in this certain way and you're showing that you're protecting parts of the environment, then what's the point of building the road?
Thanks. So I apologize, I kind of brought us down to another path. Sorry. So I have another priority. Shoot, my priority. This inclusionary housing. Around affordable housing and projects over a certain size, certain number of units, then are mandated in a very short-term way, I think, of providing some units to be affordable for a certain amount of time. So we get that not only through the largesse of the developer really, or if they want to trade off for waivers.
I'm not sure I understand what inclusionary housing is.
So if Beaverbrook again, they put up, if the zoning might say over 15 units or more, at least 2 units have to be affordable housing. And maybe Carolyn or Wayne could say that in better, more professional terms.
That's exactly
the
right.
way I understood it. And then it's a zoning.
And the challenge, the drafting standard is, how do you make sure that you don't indirectly encourage the wrong kind of projects? Because everyone, obviously, whatever the threshold is, everyone tries to sneak in just below that.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful, and it may be a spatial component. You know, again, there's lots of ways to do it, but as an example, if we're trying to encourage people being close to urban centers, one approach is to say we're not going to give them an extra burden close to urban centers, and if you're way out in suburbia, we don't necessarily want the housing in the first place, we definitely can do that. But then you might get affordable housing in the wrong places, so you know, all those things are issues to talk about.
It's something I think the housing partnership has been looking at for years.
You also want new projects not to negatively affect the percentage of affordable housing we have now. It's another reason to have a requirement, so it ought to be at least 10% of the unit. Hey, something like that.
George and Wayne, because inclusionary housing includes what TDR, transfer development rights?
Right.
Wasn't there another, I mean, I'm missing it, wasn't there a whole other issue on TDR? Or is that the only one? Because I would say whether we could lump them together, we're gonna talk about.
Carolyn's written that. Again, this is something that sort of we have a draft and start having discussion.
Oh, so it's not, I thought, wasn't it on this list, or was it, that's a separate thing?
I can't remember some list.
Yeah,
But-
that's what I was
but
looking for.
The basic draft, and Carolyn can go in much more detail, is saying, you know, the problem with these goodies that we want from developers is we want all the goodies. We want the open space, we want the affordable housing. Is there a way to weigh them to say, we better get one of these things, but not every site can give each one of these things?
I just found it's under point-based site plan smart growth. So what I was thinking, because it came up on Tuesday, some people were talking about, can we group some of these together? Like there's 3 about green community. If we can group TDR with inclusionary housing, at least maybe a little subcommittee can go work on that piece.
Well, it only makes sense because of Carolyn's ordinance is there, so at least
Right.
those departing.
Well, like the cluster, I mean, combine this, anything to do with clusters, we can combine those.
The smart growth zoning go with that?
Where's that?
That's a little lower down.
What's the full language?
Oh, 40R smart growth?
Yeah. Could you also combine in a cluster some of the design things, like form-based code, design standards, design guidelines? Put them together.
The form-based code is more that sort of big paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So it probably should be an area in itself because it requires a lot of attention. It's a much longer piece. Design guidelines are certainly much simpler.
Yeah.
Form-based code is not low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Yes.
Actually, I was wondering about that. Is it possible that design guidelines are slightly lower hanging than the form-based? Would that be a place to start with that? Because form-based is such a big project?
Yeah.
Because that's something that's always interesting.
And one of the questions about design guidelines for you in terms of your priorities is, are we talking about specific areas like West Street, for example?
Right,
Or are we talking about standards that apply everywhere?
right, right.
And one of the things in the draft that Wayne mentioned, actually, that's wrapped into transfer development rights and incentives, the other incentives that we're looking at, is a component of design criteria. So even if we're providing incentives, you know, the idea would be, we'll provide incentives to do certain things, but no matter what, you still have to look good. So even if you're, you know, if you're doing, if there are incentives to build more density in certain areas, you can't just, and then you're providing LEED certification, you also have to meet some sort of design criteria. You can't just plunk down a single block box and walk away.
What about the housing alternatives? That seems like an idea that's time is right. We talked about that at the CAC meeting a couple of months ago.
More with it.
We call it workforce housing. that
Live
concept.
work
yeah.
space.
Yeah, I wonder if we could provide some incentives for people to pursue.
Well, certainly, one of the practical things to think about, you know, George identified the inclusionary housing. The easiest model is to say, as Franny was saying, housing projects above a certain size have to be 10% affordable, have to be 11.9%, that's what we happen to be. The more complicated is to say, well, we really want subsidized units, they're 80% median income, the traditional affordable housing piece, but we also really want workforce housing. Are they all the same? You know, I mean, you could do inclusionary, because we're above the 10% standard for the state, we don't desperately need affordable housing just to have our independence from the state. So you could do inclusionary housing ordinance that gave you credit for either workforce housing or affordable housing. So it might be, in terms of the cluster, it might be part of the same discussion.
Can we opt an incentive, say, within a zoning district where there was relief from, say, the front yard setback or the frontage requirement if you went below a certain square footage on the footprint of the house, or the overall square footage of the house?
Legal, absolutely. The challenge becomes finding incentives that developers really want. Like we've offered
But
bonus
if we can
density.
increase the number of units, that would be an incentive for them.
Your frontage is probably closer. I mean, we've offered bonus densities in our cluster regulations for affordable housing for 10 or 15 years. not a single person's ever wanted it, because they get the unit, they get the bonus density that the market supports anyway. They don't want those extra units.
But what if we didn't have the requirement that they were affordable per the formula? We were just looking for a size, and then it was up to the developer
Right.
to, do whatever he wanted with it, but presumably those would be more affordable units.
Yeah, that could definitely work.
I had for low-hanging fruit, things like regulatory simplification, design standard for public domain, things that if the committee could get through and get some tangible results in a fairly quick, process that might keep the subcommittee going, because if they jump into this big stuff, they'll never get through it. And then, big picture things, we talked about design guidelines like West Street, the King Street stuff, King Street development, Central Business District and stuff like that. I talked about character districts along King Street. And then the point-based site plan, smart growth, you discussed that, that seemed intriguing to me, but very much a big picture type thing.
Yeah, I love that. Let me mention one thing about the regulatory simplification. This fits back in terms of when I'm thinking about how we're going to survive with less staff, and it's certainly one that I think we need, in that short term of just for straight financial reasons, I think we need to do something.
That seemed like that would be to everyone's benefit, and it's something that people could really jump right into.
When we talked about bundling things, there's four or five things here around traffic and parking. And I don't know if some of this is actually part of the domain of the transportation committee, but I know I'm really interested in these parking requirements, about the number of spaces for folks that seem to be above and beyond what's really needed. Off the top of my head, it looks like low-hanging fruit, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who would come to those hearings and speak vociferously against limiting parking,
It might depend where it is. I mean, I agree with you totally. If you're doing King Street, if you get rid of all parking requirements at King Street, there's not that much spillover in neighborhoods, and it might not be controversial. If you do, say, a former dry cleaner on North Street, and the parking requirements aren't enough, you get a lot of spillover in the neighborhoods, and people really don't like that. So I think it all depends on how close the neighborhoods are.
But if we hinge that somehow with this TDR and alternative methods and the traffic mitigation, I think there's a lot of work that around the sustainability plan too, about reducing traffic, reducing single access vehicles, that politically the city wants to look at, people in the city do. So it's and I don't know exactly what the transportation committee does, whether they're looking at those things too.
Well, I was looking at traffic calming, and I know that we just got, the standards on those, so that might be low-hanging fruit because it has to do with, implementation of subdivisions, right?
That becomes a question. You're absolutely right. So that's one of the questions for you all: is this committee looking at subdivision regulations at all, as well? I think we should look at it anyway, but does that go to this committee, or is that just here?
It came up briefly at the meeting, and because we only give out zoning regulations and sustainability plan, we didn't talk about subdivision. I mean, there was nothing. I don't think there's anything in the charter that says we couldn't. But so I think the understanding, at least, was it was just zoning. So I mean, it's pretty open. If we wanted to, I suppose we could. Have to give them another book to read.
Well, the thing is, if you could probably, if there was something that would be appropriate as a zoning change or some other regulatory change that made sense to also incorporate into the subdivision rules, you all could take that on because you're charged with changing those rules. So it wouldn't be, I think we would still focus on zoning and not worry about how it fits in the subdivision.
What percentage of these items on here do you think actually would be for the zoning, whatever it's called, zoning revision committee?
So far, we've identified about half of them as a high priority.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's not a matter of priority, but some of them aren't applicable at all to zoning, I would think.
Well, the ones in white and gray are off because either they're started or they're already.
Yeah.
the other ones, I think the idea was this whole list would go through them and then come back up.
I think you're right, but some may be more cursory. There may be some of that low-hanging fruit may be go through them and give them ideas to comment and then come back to you, whereas some might be months of working groups.
And we talked about that. I said what we'd like to do is find a mixture of things that are going to take a while and things that are going to be quick.
Yeah, why don't you put them in those buckets?
Yeah, because I think the committee,
And
be
then
nice for them as a new
prioritize.
committee to get a few things just done.
Yeah,
And one of
or
the things
work
they
on
talked about.
simultaneously.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
And is it better for them to do them one at a time, or would it be better for them to come back to you with a group? If we had 5 things, would you want them all at one time, or would you want them, piecemeal? And the other was, when they do present, when there is a presentation, would you all want to have a joint meeting or some representative from the group, or it could be me to give the presentation? But I think some people from that committee will probably want to come to be able to give you information.
In terms of the answers, whatever the board wants.
Right.
But I think there's an opportunity now to do some things forward, both because you're less busy and it's a good time to take things to the city council. So identifying the really low-hanging fruit that can move very quickly.
I mean, I suppose it's our purview. If there were a couple things we want to knock off this list and just say, oh, we don't need it, but otherwise we could identify them and ask them to move on quickly.
Yeah, well, I guess one of my points is that, practically everything is listed as zoning thing, but there may be other approaches to those regulations as part of the sustainability plan.
I don't quite follow your phrasing. Some other
other than
groups,
zoning,
Other than zoning,
Yeah.
some other way, yeah, some other regulation that wouldn't necessarily come under the zoning.
Can I pitch
Some of
one?
it could be, pardon?
Can I pitch one as well? Can I pitch one of the changes to think about? It's something that might be fairly fast, and I think there's one property in the market that I'm a little worried about. It's that it's close to the end. It's one of those we added. It was not in the original list, to be clear, so it's not in the plan, but it's looking at watershed protection district and whether we should rezone that area to be special conservancy. Because it's partially regulatory simplification. We'll get rid of entire zoning district. It's sort of with this SC and with this watershed protection, they're similar. It's partially, we've now fought, Carolyn spent a long time, Marilyn was involved with this, on the whole SC district, of sort of saying it's basically in the area of floodplain, we don't really want development. The watershed protection is less clear about that. And frankly, this is an issue right now because it's property on the market on Meadow Street. And it's floodplain, but it's not SC, and so it's not as clear there shouldn't be homes there. And so I think it's worth having that discussion.
Is Meadow Street on the other side of 91?
Meadow Street is in Florence.
Oh, I say down in Meadow. I say down in Meadow stuff.
Yeah,
Past Lilly Library?
that's not it.
yeah.
That's not the only watershed protection district.
No, but most of them are sort of very thin core. It's the only one that covers a vast area. It's all over town, but it tends to be a 100-foot strip along every river. Right. And then you have this big floodplain that's over there.
Yeah, jump on that one.
Well, so that one would stay here. You don't want to sit that one.
That's up to you. I like us to pay attention. What the process is, you tell me.
Well, if it's not, the thing was, if it's not on this list, it's up to us to either refer to that committee or not. It's our choice. So we could decide if there are zoning things that we say, they don't have to go to the zoning conditions committee. They can stay here, and we can just deal with them. But if we think that they're of such a scope, or they're controversial, or you want to try to have somebody else do all the public input, then you can refer it to the zoning revisions committee.
It's been on my list, I think, to do someday, ever since Carolyn worked with you all on the SC. The fact is, there's a lot of land on the market, makes it more time.
I mean, we would be able to act on it more quickly. That committee's going to take, I would imagine it's going to be a few months before they're up and running on be able to handle anything of any size. They may be able to handle some smaller things, but if it's something that you want done in the next few months, I probably would say we should do it here.
I do, it's obviously your call.
One of the characteristics of the zoning revisions committee was that they were going to do a lot of outreach for all of this. And this is one, because it's property ownership, that would need a lot of outreach.
Yeah, that's actually true.
But that's because we wouldn't have the time for all of them, but if there's one
Right.
that we think we can handle the outreach, like Carolyn's doing with the zero lot line, you know, then we can, if our schedule is allowing us to do it. And I could also use that committee to say, look, this is what the planning board's thinking about doing, you know, those people are representatives of Ward 3 and Bay State and various groups, and say, look, this is what we're thinking about. We're not gonna refer it to you, but you're in the loop.
Yep.
Okay, is that enough information for you?
This is something that, you know, as a particularly low-hanging piece of fruit that we haven't called out, that would be, there's a lot out here now, I think this is, you know, a good start for us.
Can't we use that term shovel-ready instead?
Shovel ready.
120 days?
Yeah, unless there's
The
anything,
Cecil group like to use the term low-hanging fruit, I used it facetiously,
We used to.
as I use shovel-ready too.
the only one here that looks really, really simple is grading of private driveways. I can't imagine it's very complicated. I mean, it's that,
Oh, we can turn it,
well, we could, but we're gonna ask them to do that for us.
oh, they can too,
Yeah. I can't imagine.
No, I mean, I think that's something that would be under the subcommittee.
Yeah, give them a little, throw them a bone.
Right, right.
Make it easy.
I thought the subcommittee was specifically to look at things related to the sustainability plan, that I guess the grading of private driveways is more a public safety issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not specifically called out in the plan, so that would be a logic for you doing it. But, you know, certainly if you look at the goals in the comprehensive plan, you can find goals that support public safety, you know. And obviously, this is mostly about public safety. The idea of the steep driveways, we used to not care, it was an individual home, but we realized the fire trucks took off. But they tend to be in outlying areas, so there is a land use connection to, you know, if you limit drivers over 12%, you're not limiting anything downtown, but you are limiting downtown.
Okay, we have a rare opportunity to adjourn by Catherine's bedtime.
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
yeah,
Let Keith second, because
Keith, is
it's
that,
your last ceremonial second.
are you coming to another meeting? Or is this it?
Hey, oh, Steve, you have to come up here and
Oh, do I actually?
adjourn the meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should keep going then.
Huh? You're the
I
boss.
don't have anywhere to go.
Is it too late to change the vote?
Or if you have no
All in
second.
favor?
Right.
Okay, slam that. There you go.
Thank you.
Steve's off.
Well, Frandy, thanks for 3 years.
No, we don't
Or
have.
somewhere around there.
It felt like.
All right, thank you.
Just come over here, just like you're.
No, that goes to Carolyn. Wayne always forgets it with Carolyn.
Yeah.
Oh, this is for you too.
No, my guess is
Oh, okay,
they
thank you.
probably wanna, no, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody is invited to come down for a little going away party for Mr. Wilson, and there will be hors d'oeuvres.